It's our 29th WNBA Finals. Exciting night here in Las Vegas as the Aces prepare to take on the Phoenix Mercury in the first ever.
The biggest star in sports right now is being
hunted, and the league's commissioner is drowning in a public catastrophe entirely of her own creation. Everyone believes the rage swirling around the WNBA is about hard fouls and explosive rivalries. But the truth runs far deeper, far more deliberate. Music. And it leads straight back to one coach, one press conference, and a public warning that became a self-fulfilling prophecy, leaving the league's highest office, music, in a complete and total state of collapse. The story everyone watches unfold on the court is only half the picture, a physical expression of a psychological war that ignited before a single opening tip. The real drama, the very root of Commissioner Kathy Engelbert's growing fury, began with a seemingly harmless but deeply calculated statement from Stephanie White, head coach of the Connecticut Sun. Before her team was even scheduled to face the Indiana Fever and their electrifying rookie Caitlin Clark, White laid her entire game plan bare for the whole world to absorb. Music. In a pre-game media session with reporters hanging on her every syllable, she spoke openly about the brutal reality of professional basketball. She discussed the necessity of physicality, about refusing to allow Clark any comfort, about the critical importance of making her earn every single basket. She made clear that this was not college, and that the defensive intensity would be on an entirely different planet. Music. On the surface, it sounded like standard, forgettable coach speak, the kind of routine commentary you catch in every pre-game interview across every sport imaginable. But inside the superheated, hyper-scrutinized atmosphere surrounding Caitlin Clark's rookie season, those words landed as something else entirely. It wasn't simply a game plan. It was a declaration of war. Music. It was a message delivered not just to her own locker room, but to every franchise sitting inside the WNBA. Stephanie White was not just any ordinary coach. Music. And that is precisely what gave her words such enormous, undeniable weight. She was a former Indiana Fever head coach herself, a deeply respected voice in the league with an intimate understanding of its culture and its players. When she spoke, the rest of the league took notes. Her words handed out a blueprint, a kind of strategic and intellectual permission slip for how every team should approach handling the Caitlin Clark phenomenon. The subtext was unmistakable and impossible to ignore. The kid gloves were being ripped off, and the welcome to the pros would be merciless. It was a public signal that the reverence Clark commanded from the media would find absolutely no reflection on the hardwood. Music. And what unfolded across the weeks and months that followed would prove her words were not merely strategy, but a chillingly accurate omen for the chaos that was about to swallow the entire league whole. Stephanie White's prophecy was fulfilled almost immediately, and with a ferocity that left even the most seasoned basketball observers visibly stunned. From Clark's very first preseason appearance, the physicality operated on a level she had simply never encountered before. It wasn't just tight, suffocating defense. It was a relentless, bruising, systematic campaign, music, designed to push her physical limits to the breaking point and shatter her mental resolve entirely. Defenders weren't simply guarding her. They were delivering loud, unmistakable messages with every bump, every shove, and every brutal off-ball screen. The league produced a highlight reel of pure aggression, shoulder checks, hip checks, and players visibly going far out of their way to put her on the floor, frequently away from the ball and completely outside the natural rhythm of the game. The most notorious moment, music, the one that tore through into the mainstream national news cycle, came from Chicago Sky's Chennedy Carter. Music. In a moment of naked, unprovoked aggression, Carter bulldozed Clark with a blindside shoulder check as she stood waiting for an inbound pass. The officials on the floor completely failed to recognize the glaring nature of the infraction, initially calling only a common foul. The public explosion was thunderous. Social media detonated. Sports talk programs cleared their entire rundowns to dissect the cheap shot in exhausting detail. The pressure mounted so intensely that the league office was left with no option but to intervene post-game and upgrade the call to a flagrant foul. But the story refused to end there. Next came the confrontation involving her college rival Angel Reese, who caught Clark with a violent foul to the head while contesting a shot attempt. Once again, upon review, the play was upgraded to a flagrant foul, pouring fresh fuel onto an already raging inferno. Every incident ignited a new viral firestorm, a fresh chapter in the ongoing saga of Clark's savage professional initiation. And every one of them seemed to ring back directly to Stephanie White's original declaration: "This is how we are going to handle her." The strategy had evolved far beyond one team's game plan into a league-wide onslaught, and Commissioner Kathy Engelbert was left helplessly watching as her most valuable asset. Music, the single player driving the league's extraordinary and historic growth, was being used as a human pinball right in front of the entire watching world. But the physical punishment on the court was only the beginning of a far larger, far more complicated crisis building behind the firmly shut doors of the league office. This relentless and devastatingly public targeting of Caitlin Clark has locked WNBA Commissioner Kathy Engelbert inside an absolutely impossible situation. A genuine nightmare scenario for any executive charged simultaneously with growth and governance. Music. On one side, she is presiding over the most explosive, record-shattering period of expansion in the league's nearly 3-decade existence. Music. The Caitlin Clark effect is not just a compelling media narrative. It is a quantifiable, undeniable economic miracle. Music. Arenas are selling out from the opening tip night after night. Franchises are relocating games to larger NBA facilities simply to meet the unprecedented and overwhelming demand for seats. Television ratings are obliterating every all-time record, with regular season matchups pulling viewership figures previously reserved exclusively for WNBA Finals broadcasts. Merchandise is moving off shelves at a pace no one in the sport has ever witnessed. Clark is not simply a basketball player. She is a one-woman financial stimulus package for the entire ecosystem of women's basketball. Engelbert, drawing from her experience as former CEO of Deloitte, understands this reality more acutely than anyone alive. Her central mission is to harness this once-in-a-generation opportunity and lock in the league's long-term financial foundation permanently. But on the opposing side, she is being buried under a tidal wave of fierce, unrelenting criticism that the league is catastrophically failing to protect its golden goose. Every time Clark absorbs another cheap shot, the commissioner's office is buried in an avalanche of outrage. And it isn't arriving solely from anonymous voices on social media. It is pouring in from major media personalities like Stephen A. Smith and Pat McAfee, from NBA legends including Charles Barkley and LeBron James, all of whom have loudly and publicly condemned both the officiating standards and the league's glaring, repeated inaction. This is the true origin of the commissioner's reported fury. It is not anger directed at Clark or the overwhelming attention she attracts, but a deep, scorching frustration with the treacherous tightrope she is forced to walk every single day. If she issues a directive to the referees to extend Clark's special protection and guard her more aggressively, she risks alienating the veteran players who would instantly interpret it as blatant favoritism, fundamentally undermining the league's competitive integrity from within. But if she remains passive and allows the brutal physical play to continue unchecked, she stands accused of weak leadership, of permitting her biggest star to be openly bullied, and of recklessly inviting a catastrophic injury that could derail the entire growth trajectory of the league in an instant. It is a textbook no-win situation, a genuine crisis of leadership, and every thread of it traces back to a conversation ignited by Stephanie White's simple yet devastatingly effective declaration. The on-court hostility directed at Caitlin Clark is not unfolding inside a vacuum. It is a physical symptom of a far deeper, far more complicated fracture running straight through the very soul of the WNBA. There is a palpable tension, a slow-burning resentment between the league's established veterans and the unprecedented, all-consuming phenomenon surrounding a single rookie. Music. For years, WNBA players have been fierce warriors for their sport, clawing for every fragment of media attention, competing in relative obscurity compared to their male counterparts. Music, and waging daily battles for basic dignities like charter flights and livable wages. They constructed this league with their sweat, their music brilliance, and their absolute, unshakable dedication. Then, without warning, Caitlin Clark steps out of college, and with her arrives a media circus of a scale this league has never once witnessed before. It is a magnitude of attention that even the sport's most celebrated legends never commanded at the absolute height of their powers. Figures like Diana Taurasi, arguably the greatest to ever wear a WNBA uniform, fired pointed, nearly dismissive remarks before Clark had even heard her name called on draft night, famously cautioning that reality was coming, and that her dominance in college would not transfer seamlessly to the professional stage. Those words were never simple trash talk. They were a direct window into the deeply guarded mindset of the old guard. They see a player who, in their eyes, is being handed the keys to an entire kingdom without having music, spent a single day paying dues in the trenches. The resentment stretches well beyond basketball ability. It is fundamentally about respect and a burning sense of historical justice. They feel that their own legacies, their own suffering, and the very league they poured their lives into building are being swallowed whole, and music, in certain cases, completely erased by a dominant narrative that positions Clark as the sport's one and only savior. This simmering jealousy and fierce professional pride erupts as relentless hyperphysicality on the court. Music. It is their chosen language for delivering a brutal and unambiguous lesson. You are not in Iowa anymore. Music. Every single ounce of respect in this league must be earned with blood and sweat. This deeply rooted culture clash drops Kathy Engelbert into yet another inescapable bind. She cannot legislate emotions or force seasoned veterans to welcome a new star with warmth and open arms. The internal politics swirling inside the league are an absolute minefield of egos, legacies, music, and legitimate, long-festering grievances. And the drama that erupted from one straightforward coaching strategy has now blown open a generational and cultural divide that threatens to destroy the league's internal unity at the precise moment of its greatest external triumph. And what makes this entire situation exponentially more volatile is the undeniable fact that the whole world is now locked in and watching, courtesy of the very media engine that Clark herself set roaring. The fierce, often savage drama encircling Caitlin Clark has transformed into a strange and dangerous double-edged sword for Commissioner Engelbert and the WNBA as an institution. The perpetual conflict is feeding an unprecedented media frenzy that is paradoxically extraordinary for business. Every punishing foul, music, every inflammatory comment, every sideline stare-down is clipped, music, dissected, and debated without pause across every major national platform imaginable. Music. ESPN's First Take, FS1's Undisputed, The Pat McAfee Show. These are media titans that rarely, if ever, committed significant airtime to women's professional basketball. Now, they are opening their broadcasts with extended segments dedicated entirely to Clark and the league surrounding her. This wall-to-wall coverage is an enormous strategic victory. It drives social media engagement into the stratosphere, keeps the WNBA trending relentlessly, and plants the league firmly inside the national sports conversation every single day without fail. This caliber of exposure is absolutely priceless, a marketing phenomenon that no budget in the world could manufacture or replicate. It becomes especially vital as the league accelerates toward its most consequential negotiation in history. A new, potentially transformative media rights deal. The more drama that burns, the more eyes tune in. The more eyes tuned in, the more leverage Engelbert carries into that negotiating room to secure a deal capable of permanently reshaping the financial architecture of the WNBA. However, this very same media machine is precisely what turns the heat inside Kathy Engelbert's office to a completely unbearable intensity. The suffocating scrutiny ensures that every decision she makes, or conspicuously fails to make, is immediately placed beneath a national microscope with nowhere to hide. The prevailing media narrative has broadly painted the league as dysfunctional and silently complicit in the systematic targeting of Clark, generating enormous public pressure demanding that the commissioner intervene and act with unmistakable decisiveness. Music. She is trapped inside a vicious feedback loop. She desperately needs the drama to fuel the ratings that will deliver the landmark television deal, but she simultaneously needs to control the narrative tightly enough to shield the league's long-term reputation and protect its most indispensable star from genuine physical destruction. The firestorm is phenomenal for the bottom line, but it is also incinerating her capacity to manage this crisis with any recognizable degree of quiet, measured authority. And buried beneath all the visible layers of on-court warfare and media spin, there are even more sensitive, far more explosive tensions at work that render the commissioner's position nearly untenable. Beneath the surface of hard fouls and veteran bitterness, there are whispers circulating, heated online debates erupting, and quiet but persistent speculations swirling about deeper, far more troubling motivations powering the hostility. In the charged battlegrounds of social media, inside the comment sections of major articles, and from the mouths of certain prominent voices, a deeply sensitive and sharply divisive narrative has begun forcing its way into the open. Some have openly questioned whether the fierce animosity directed at Clark is driven by forces rooted in far more than her extraordinary talent or her historically unprecedented media profile. Music. They point directly to the league's own demographics and speculate openly that her identity as a white, heterosexual player inside a predominantly black and largely LGBTQ+ league, combined with her wholesome, all-American girl-next-door image, plays a significant and undeniable role in the on-court hostility she endures. This is an extraordinarily delicate and combustible topic, and for the WNBA, it represents a public relations powder keg sitting beneath an open flame. The league has long positioned itself as a proud beacon of progressivism, a tireless champion of social justice, racial equality, and LGBTQ+ rights for every player who has ever worn its uniform. The mere suggestion that race or other deeply personal identity factors, music, are actively influencing the way players treat one another between the lines is profoundly damaging to the brand and everything it has loudly and publicly proclaimed to stand for. This forces Cathy Engelbert to navigate not merely a basketball problem, but a complex and deeply incendiary social crisis simultaneously. She cannot directly confront these whispers without feeding them more oxygen and legitimizing a toxic, runaway debate. Yet completely ignoring them allows a corrosive and destructive narrative to fester unchallenged across the internet, risking the permanent alienation of entirely different and equally vital segments of her growing fan base. Music, it layers yet another dimension of pure impossibility onto her already impossible job, transforming what should be a straightforward matter of player conduct into a cultural minefield with no visible, navigable path leading out the other side. Music, and every single one of these deeply complex, intricately interwoven threads leads directly back to the one coach who first put the entire league on public notice. So we return, inevitably, to where every strand of this story originates, with Stephanie White. It is highly unlikely she ever intended to unleash this magnitude of chaos across the full breadth of the league. From her vantage point as a head coach, she was simply fielding a reporter's question about her defensive approach heading into a single upcoming game. Music, she was talking basketball, pure X's and O's, mapping out a plan to be physical and suffocating against a uniquely gifted and dangerous offensive player. A plan that, viewed entirely in isolation, is deployed by coaches across every sport on every level every single day without consequence. However, her words were not released into a vacuum. They were dropped directly into the highly combustible, supercharged atmosphere surrounding the Caitlin Clark phenomenon, a league already simmering beneath a decades-long accumulation of veteran jealousy and deep frustration over chronic lack of recognition, and a modern media landscape that is ravenous for and structurally dependent on conflict to survive. Her technically sound and strategically legitimate statement became the single spark that ignited the fuse of a far larger and far more destructive explosive device. Music, other players and franchises, already harboring very specific feelings about the rookie's meteoric arrival, heard her words and immediately received them as public validation for their own deeply aggressive intentions. Music, the media, seizing the moment with both hands, weaponized those comments as the opening cannon blast in a sweeping narrative of an organized war being waged against the rookie. What was delivered as a simple, calculated strategic remark was almost instantaneously transformed into an unofficial rallying cry for the anti-Clark faction quietly taking shape inside the league. While Stephanie White is by no means the sole architect of this sprawling and complicated disaster, her words made her the wholly unintentional engineer of the commissioner's most relentless and consuming headache. She inadvertently constructed the stage and provided the opening script for the entire unfolding saga, leaving Cathy Engelbert alone to absorb the cascading fallout of a fractured league, a ravenous and insatiable media circus, music, and a crisis of identity that deepens and intensifies with every punishing foul and every scorching public debate. The WNBA now stands at a genuinely pivotal moment, a true and consequential crossroads in its storied history, and its long-term future may very well hang precariously in the balance. The league has been handed a generational, transformative force in Caitlin Clark, a player who has delivered more attention, more revenue, music, and more fans to the sport than any human being ever believed possible within such a breathtakingly compressed window of time. Music, yet this golden and irreplaceable opportunity, this singular chance to ascend permanently to a new tier of mainstream cultural relevance, is being actively and aggressively undermined by a perfect and merciless storm of internal destruction. It is a storm stoked by a veteran coach's eerily prophetic public warning, a league-wide physical campaign of sustained aggression, deep and long-rooted resentment from the very players who sacrificed everything to construct this league from the ground up. Music, and a voracious, insatiable media machine that harvests profit from every single chaotic second. Standing directly at the eye of this swirling and ferocious vortex is Commissioner Kathy Engelbert, a leader ensnared inside what has effectively become an entirely unwinnable war fought on multiple fronts simultaneously. She is compelled to balance the sacred obligation of protecting her league's most irreplaceable asset against the competing need to preserve genuine competitive fairness for all, while simultaneously attempting to navigate the treacherous and largely unspoken cultural fault lines that have been violently cracked open for the world to examine. The fury radiating outward from the league office is not simply about one player or one controversial foul call. It is the profound and bone-deep frustration of a leader forced to watch her league's brightest, most promising, and most consequential moment risk being consumed entirely and destroyed from within by unchecked internal warfare. The ultimate question, the defining one that will shape her legacy and determine the future direction of the entire sport, still hangs unanswered in the air. Can she somehow find a way to steer this ship through the turbulent, largely self-created waters threatening to capsize everything? The biggest star in sports right now is being relentlessly targeted, and the league has simultaneously never been more popular or more visible in its entire existence. But that same explosive popularity could ultimately become the very force that tears it completely apart from the inside out. Everyone believes the fury swirling around the WNBA is about hard fouls and igniting rivalries, but the truth runs far deeper, is far more deliberate, far more calculated, and it traces its origin back to one coach, one press conference,